What does it take to be a good teacher?
Well, there's two teachers in the room, so good listener would be number one. Always two teachers in the room. And when I wrote a memoir with Kirsty McClelland-Day as a writer from Calgary, I worked with her husband at Channels 2 and 7, CFAC television. And Kirsty was always after me to write a book, and I understood almost innately that I was too young to write a book, but I did it anyway for Kirsty. But I told Kirsty one of the great lessons of my life was in understanding conversation. Two of the best writers ever, Shakespeare and Cervantes. One, Cervantes, the novelist from Spain. The other is, of course, the dramatist from the UK. Both of them, all the wisdom is discovered in conversation. What I told Kirsty, the greatest lesson for me is, okay, Don Cherry and I, we're out there. You kids, wear your poppies. You kids, take your hats off during the O Canada. We're always trying to teach, Don especially, he's trying to teach honor and good. And before you know it, we're in trouble with the Finnish consulate or the province of Quebec, or somehow we've screwed it up again, and so we go back to our hotel room and we pour a beer, or we sit over morning coffee and we try to figure out, how did that go so wrong? What could we have done better? And then the genius comes out. Don Cherry's life on the road, Don Cherry's coaching Bobby Orr, my studying ethics all my life because I had wanted to be a teacher and because I'm a broadcaster. And I said, if we could only have taped those talks and played them, we'd have had a really, really good book. But it was impossible to recreate. But I know that's where wisdom is found, is in that conversation.
You mentioned Don, and you mentioned Coach's Corner, which is a staple when we look at a national conversation that people tune into to listen, to learn, to react. And the interesting part, and I was looking up your personal influences, and the editor of Harper's being one of them, this notion of getting people to think for themselves.
Yeah.
You present a great deal of information week by week for a nation to unite, but how do you present it in a way that you have your audience listening but also doing their own thinking?
That is brilliant. That is absolutely the key to the deal. Is Louis Lapham was the editor of Harper's Magazine, and he would get all these manuscripts, all these submissions to have a story put in Harper's, and he always said, Riaz, if I do not see the word I, it goes right in the garbage. I have to hear the first person. So that's the secret of Don's success, is he reveals what he thinks. And then me as anchor, I'm in a bit of a quandary because I'm the host. I want my guest to be the star. So it's really important not to steal Don's moment in the sun. But at the same time, as we've evolved, I understood that you need to hear I out of me too. Because if you don't hear I in whomever it is you're reading, listening to, or watching, it's not authentic. So it's really important to give of yourself. It sounds egotistical, but it's not. It's just giving the best of you. It's like the art of loving. You have to love yourself first, right, in order to be any good at all. Whereas I used to just say, okay, thoughts on Bobby Orr, thoughts on Wayne Gretzky, and I was kind of perfunctory in the role. Eventually I felt, okay, now we got to get it to a point where it's conversation between these two larks who've been around as long as they have. What makes each tick, and how does the dynamic serve one another?
Well, it makes a lot of sense, because if we look at the medium with the morning show, we always look at, okay, well, what is the topic? And we always think, introduce the story, what's our opinion on it? And then to the audience, here's why you should care about it. And to make them care, it always takes a degree of really fascinating questions with an emotional transaction. And whether you're dealing with players on screen or people across the country with hometown hockey, what do you find are the most effective questions you use when you're connecting and conveying that authentic relationship?
Super complicated, because sometimes it's how do you feel, right? And it's an unknowing question. It's just a simple exploration or being curious. Other times it's demonstrating your research so that the guest ignites. The guest realizes, my God, that person took that much care to sort of investigate my life. Now I'm fully engaged. So that's the final. Everything's a balance, right? Everything is a balance. We know that. The best question, I think it's that mix of I do need to excite the interviewee. I need to let them know I care, and then I also need to back off a little bit and say how, why, what, just the basics.
Context is what I'm hearing from you, and I think when anybody asks me that question, what is the best question? I don't think there is. There's one you can throw out.
Yeah, it's a feel. And again, people are aligned certain ways. Some are very philosophical in their thinking. Some are very pragmatic and practical. It's kind of good to know that going in, so that you don't make them uncomfortable. Another great experience for me was getting ready for the Olympics. I was asked by Claire Carver-Dias, who is a synchronized swimmer, to do a little something for a video she was putting together. And then I heard her story, and she wrote a story about being at the Olympic Games in 2000 in Australia, and she said, if you saw me on television, the camera went right in on me just before our competition. And I had these, Bambi eyes. I was a kid, I was naive, I was nervous. And it all looked big, there was 10,000 people in the pool area. There were millions watching on television, and that's the snapshot. So that's the selfie. But if you went through my eyes and into the network of people behind me, then you'd get to the bottom of everything. You'd understand that I had these coaches. I had this one of my colleagues one night when I was sitting in a stairwell at a practice facility, devastated, thinking I cannot go on. This colleague actually sat down beside me on the stairwell and said, no, Claire, you can do it, and here's why. And it's not always right to say perk up. Sometimes you just need to be a listener. But her understanding of the web of behind you, instead of that, we're in the selfie generation right now where everything is sort of superficial and the impression you get is the exterior. I just loved her understanding to go way deeper, to get past the superficial. Riaz, in every interview, that's my aim is, okay, I need to trigger you in some way to feel comfortable enough to be vulnerable, to be able to be wrong, to actually say what you're thinking, knowing full well you might be wrong. It's so hard in our world to accept being wrong because you'll be inundated with a social media backlash. The timidity right now is, it's not overly constructive. It's funny because you go back, I'm sure lots of folks had mental illness, but it's now 1 in 5. How can that be when we have the internet, when we have social media, when we are so connected? How can we feel so alone? We're not lonely, but we're so alone in our fear of being wrong or being perceived as less. And I think we all have that, right? We all have that sort of insecurity right now that is born of this beast, this technological beast.
One of the things you do extremely well in watching and studying and learning from it is the art of storytelling and unforgettable storytelling and the elements, the description, the imagery and emotion you throw in. How do you approach this, whether you're speaking in front of a crowd, you're in front of the camera, in front of a nationwide audience?
Well, again, Riaz, it's learning that's the best mechanism to deliver the message, right? So if I want to sell you a diamond, I could say, the cut, the color, the carat, whatever the 4 C's are.
Or talk to my wife and then it's sold.
Or I could say, what do you think Lori's friends would react to, like when they see the diamond?
Oh.
I would have to appeal to her sense of emotion. I can't give you the technical breakdown of what a diamond's value is. I have to sell you on how it will sell elsewhere, how it will play with Lori's friends. That's really imperative. So everything's about emotion. The matter of the heart. I'll give you a story. Like Don Sherry's my friend, right? Don and I are about 26 years apart. I was 26 when I met Don. He was 52. One of the greatest influences on me is a writer named Joseph Epstein. He's an essayist. I always thought Lewis Lapham's the greatest essayist, but a prof at University of Saskatchewan, Jennifer McClellan, taught me that there's another great essayist out there. His name is Joseph Epstein. When he was 36, he met a 36-year-old named Edward Shills. And when Edward Shills was on his deathbed, so about 20-odd years later, Shills said, you were my dearest friend, Joseph, but we never spoke of matters of the heart. And I remember Epstein saying, I tried not to show shock when he said that to me, but I subsequently realized after he died that we had really kind of kept our doubts, our disappointments, our grief, we had kept it to ourselves because that was the way we thought it was best. We were never ones to really go deep with those emotions. And I think it's just imperative that in a relationship like I have with Don, he lost Rose along the way. I've got to be careful because Don's ask no quarter, give no quarter guy. But it's a story, So as an example, Leonard Cohen just passed away. Leonard Cohen met a guy when he was in Montreal, a Spaniard came in, a flamenco guitar player. He was only there for a little bit of time, and he posted he was going to teach flamenco guitar. So Leonard Cohen signed up. He got 3 lessons, was ready for the 4th. The guy didn't show up, so he went to the condo where this guy was living, found out he died of mental illness that resulted in suicide. But that guy taught Leonard Cohen the 6 chords that beget Hallelujah. It's a story, right? A guy who was suffering from severe depression gave Leonard Cohen the greatest gift that now we all share. It's a story. It's a matter of the heart. So all those things we can understand. That's the best connection you can make.
Well, you showcase this because before this interview, I had the chance to call up someone you know well, your senior producer, Shirali Najak. And we talked about your working relationship together. And I asked Shirali, who I had a brief opportunity to work with a couple years ago and respect his vision, what do you respect and admire about Ron in terms of moments? And he brought up this very point you're talking about, emotion with storytelling, and he took me back to Beijing Olympics, where you experienced a very difficult time in your life, losing a loved one. And he said he always remembers how you made him feel because he was going through something similar. What do you remember about conveying, hearing news like that your life had changed, and then conveying that to the audience and being vulnerable?
Yeah, it was a surreal time. Mom broke her hip on the eve of the Olympic Games in Beijing, so that was the 8th of August, 2008. And she had pancreatic cancer, so the combination of her cancer and now the broken leg, the body just shut down, right? And we thought as we went through the Olympics that Mom was going to make it, that I would get home in time to see her off. But on day 13 of the games, she passed away, and I can remember being on the air, getting the text from Canada from my wife Carrie that Mom was gone, and I was resigned to it, right, Riaz? Mom was going to go from the pancreatic cancer in any event, and it's not a nice death. So there's that. And I just remember flying home. And one of the great things that happened to me in my life, we're all at my home in Oakville, Ontario. My dad, I had to get home for Dad's sake. I wasn't scrambling home for any reason other than to just be there for Dad. And so we're having a few drinks, and I knew that Adam Van Couverden was going to be racing at 4 in the morning. And I said, well, Adam Van Couverden's mentor lives with his mom about 6 doors away. Let's go over there and watch the race with Larry Kane is his name, and his mom, Polly. So I go over to Polly's home, his mom's home, and I knock on the door, nothing, and I imagine that Larry Kane and his mom and a bunch of the paddlers are downstairs in the basement in Oakville, Ontario, getting ready for Adam's race, and I ring the doorbell and I bang again, and finally Polly, Larry Kane's mom, comes to the window upstairs and says, Ron, what is it? And I says, well, aren't you watching Adam Van Couverden's race, Polly? I said, oh, I'm going to watch it, but it's not for another hour and a half. I have my alarm set. And I said, well, where's Larry? He said, oh, Larry just got a new condo in Burlington. She says, but if you give me a minute, I'll get dressed and I'll take you there. She's 80 years old, right? And so we'd had a few drinks, and I thought that was a good idea. So Polly takes us to Burlington, and I sat that night with the Budai family and some of the older Shaws and all these who's who of paddling in our country. And I just remember, again, the warm embrace of, bonding, tradition, all coming together in that crazy time. And I remember handing off on TV and just sort of saying to the viewer, okay, I don't mean to jar you with this, but my mom's just died. And I'm thinking to myself, what are you doing to the poor viewer? Because, some of them will relish it. Some of them will be distraught. Some of them will be, and you really got to think, right? Okay, how can I sort of kid glove this? And it was a neat time. And Shirley, his whole philosophy was always, as long as you're doing it with a red heart, which is generous, versus a black heart, which is evil, it'll be fine. So he was a very empowering, I always said, the most empowering producer. So I felt safe, just like we're talking about the interview subject. If they feel safe, it's amazing what gold you'll mine.
Do you ever get nervous up until this point, right before you go on air,
yeah.
right before you go in front of a crowd? How do you manage the anxiety?
Well, I had wicked anxiety as a youngster, and I've learned my triggers. I get out of yourself, stop thinking, how do I look? How smart will I be? And start getting into, why are we really here? Marina Zueva, she's a Russian choreographer and skating instructor, and she always said, don't worry about the judges or the audience. They're just happy for a night not at the office. And that's a good way to put it. Just realize they want a night away from the office and the pressure, and try to make their day. Get into that mode. Just think about them instead of yourself. Hard to do, but if the more time you spend in the mirror, the more time you spend on your own thinking and thoughts, the worse it'll be. If you start to remember why you wanted to do this in the first place, is to bring a little joy or a laugh or a bit of education to the viewer, it's much, much easier. So that's how I've coped. It's not easy though, Riaz. I always say, most people in broadcasting like to kid, and they are just kidding, but they say, never worked a day in my life. And I don't know how you feel, but I feel like I've never had 1 second off in my life, because I'm sitting here doing this, but in the back of my mind, I'm agonizing over how I'm going to shape Saturday night's opening. You know, what am I going to say when I get on camera? Because I've done it for 32 years. We all know it's a big game, and there's superstars and all that. So I'm always feeling this pressure to come up with something for the next show. That never goes away. It just sits right there on your shoulders for your life.
How do you do it? How do you make it evolve? What resources do you consistently look at?
Music. Sometimes you go through a period of, like Picasso's pink and blue period. Sometimes you're into politics. I'm not right at the moment. I'm into music. I'm into reading. I mentioned Joseph Epstein. I read a lot of Harold Bloom is a great writer who did 2 books. One's called Where Shall Wisdom Be Found? Another is called Genius. And they're basically explorations of Shakespeare, Cervantes, St. Augustine, Montaigne, you name it, all the great essayists, or philosophers, I should say. So I escape into that, because that's, as the saying goes, reading is a good place that can take you someplace when you really shouldn't go anywhere. You should just sit for a minute and be mindful and be present. Reading is the most gentle way for me to do that. Without it being the ricochet existence of social media, because that will just take me off on tangents. Could be, serendipity. It could be that tangent that I go off on happens to be the one I needed, so I shouldn't diss it. But I do find it so reactionary as opposed to reflective that I choose reading books over reading my smartphone.
If you could sum it all up with one defining conversation that got you to the point you're at today, what would that be?
It was a guy named Wayne Heinrich. His radio pseudonym was Wayne Barry. And Wayne was a godsend. He was almost like the Spanish flamenco guitar player coming into Leonard Cohen's life and teaching him the 6 chords that became Hallelujah. Wayne Heinrich moved to Red Deer, Alberta. He'd been a DJ in Lethbridge, and he was the program director and the man about town, had a band that played all the weddings, just a great entertainer. And he moved to our city when I was young and vulnerable and susceptible. And he taught me a lesson about letting the guest be the star. I had interviewed a guy that phoned in to win junior hockey tickets on the radio. And I was the glib, hotshot DJ having fun with my listener and all the witticisms, and that was that. And Wayne pulled me into the office and he says, Ron, he said, it was okay. He says, but this guy was good enough to listen to the radio station. He was excited enough to phone the radio station to try to win the tickets. It would have been so much better if you let him shine, if you would have made him the glib guy with the most. And I never forgot it. He taught me 2 things. He taught me that, to let your guest be the star, and he taught me that all communication, Riaz, is 1-to-1. It's not you, me, and 10 million people watching. It's me and you and 1 viewer, 1 reader, 1 listener. Simplify, because then you become a companion. You become a companion. You're now dealing with a conversation with intimacy, and that's the secret. Over the history of broadcasting, mistakes have been made time and again in programming where, the Drake format was a legendary radio format when I was young, and that was essentially 3 record sweeps, and it was the idea of more rock, less talk. But that doesn't work. Radio depends a little bit on the personality. It depends on the conversation that you have with your guests. It really is a friendship that you're nurturing. And he taught me that. He taught me always speak 1-to-1. Don't think in terms of, hi, everybody. Welcome to, hello, Canada. It's not that. It's the viewer. It's you and me. So he's the conversation that I had at the absolute right time in my life that opened the keys to the, having said that, my kingdom was then. Not now. I didn't need to get to Hockey Night in Canada. I didn't need to go anywhere to feel the same rush, the same joy of when you're opening the day in Red Deer and you say it's going to be 30 degrees with nothing but blue skies, and here's a song that I happen to love and I think you will too. You've made someone's day. The gift of doing it is that, simply that, doing it. It's not at the level, and it's not with any... Bruce Springsteen can sure speak to it. He talks a lot about losing Clarence and just that, how they made one another stronger. friendships, huge. The joy of playing is huge, but it's played out at every level. It's got nothing to do with how well known you become.
Great insights on the power of conversations. Ron, I appreciate this.
Thanks, Riaz. Yeah,
Thanks so much for doing this.
pleasure. Good luck with that diamond ring for Laurie.
I'm in trouble. She's going to say Ron said my name.
Yeah.
Here we go. Here we go. Hey, it's Riaz. Thanks for watching. For more conversations, click on subscribe and check us out online at everyconversationcounts.com.